Welcome everybody to another episode of the Jason and Bart Show. That was my best impersonation of Bart right there.
You can do better than that.
Thanks, Carl. Super excited to be here today. We've got Carl Smith with us from the Bureau of Digital. We're at the Owner Summit here in New Orleans, the last Owner Summit for the Bureau of Digital, which is sad, but I know we've got a lot of other great events coming up, and we'll talk all about that today. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're in the middle of running an event, so like it's super busy for you.
I'm sloppy.
Yeah, but you're good. So before we start with the Bureau, I want to talk a little bit about Engine and your sort of the end of Engine into the Bureau, sort of that 13, 14 into 16 sort of story, what was going on there, and specifically, how did your role at Engine sort of influence or prepare you from an experience standpoint for your role here with the Bureau?
Yeah, absolutely. So Engine was, my baby. Like I left a 14-year career in advertising to spin up Ngine Works. And it was me and 3 friends, and we got it rolling, and we felt amazing about it. They got to a point where they wanted to do other things. One went off to New York, ended up becoming the design director at Square. So it was a great team. Another one decided they wanted to go into TV. And so everybody it wasn't that they didn't want to be at Engine. They just had new things they wanted to do that Engine wasn't doing, right?
Got it.
So we ended up growing at that point, 2008, went distributed, had a bunch of folks, great folks, Travis and Rachel Gertz who were here, were on the team, grew to about 40, right? And at that point, I didn't really want to be in charge. So we kind of inverted the model to what Rachel actually called the Jellyfish Model. And that meant everybody kind of got to choose what they wanted to work on. So at that point, I was able to step back a little bit. So by say 2012, when you ended up having the Bureau start, I was an attendee. I got invited to come in, and I was, they call me Wild Stallion. I had longer hair, and I just said the most ridiculous things, right? And I was like, they were going through at one point talking about recruiting and retention, and they were talking about how people were leaving, and I was like, how do you get them to leave? I can't get people to leave. It's like, I don't want to fire anybody, but nobody's going away. Montero and I are got into
my culture is amazing.
Exactly. I was like, I don't even know what to do. But I fell in love with the Bureau. I was had moved away from my shop a little bit. People were running it. It was actually kind of 3 shops. One was way into like Whole Foods and organics, and another was into fantasy sports and building big data sets into games. And then another one was that old school group who just still wanted to do like the mom and pop restaurant that was down the street or whatever. So I started getting real into the Bureau. And then one day, I got a call from the Gregs. I was working on a project that they thought would be better suited at the Bureau. And they said it in such a way. And they invited me, this would have been 2014, to become a partner. Now, what's interesting, if I look back at that, right, like 9 years ago, my oldest daughter, who would have been 11, and I was sitting there trying to figure out what I was going to do. Did I want to go and join this? Did I have something else I wanted to do? And she came out and asked me how I wanted to be remembered, right?
Great question.
And I said,
for
what
an
do
11-year-old.
you mean? And she was like, she said, literally looking me in the eye, when you're dead, how do you want people to remember you? And I said, I want people to remember me as somebody who was successful, but didn't have to hurt anybody to be successful. I was nice, and I was able to take care of my family. Well, she was the kid of a shop owner. And then she said, how are you going to measure that? Like, what gets measured gets done. Now, we had built stores together, little things for her, right? And so we talked through this again and again. I said, well, I'll measure it by the number of people I can help. And then she said, that famous question, how does that scale? And I said, I don't know. I don't know. She went inside. I saw her high-five my wife. They were just playing a joke on me, right? But then I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this email from the Gregs, and I went, I don't have to help anybody. I just have to put people together that can help each other. So that's what made me go, I've got to focus on the Bureau. At the same time, Engine had a few hiccups. The Jellyfish Model was great, but there was no biz dev element to it.
Right.
So when the team decided not to work on something, it caused a huge disruption. We had about 400,000 in the bank, cash, taxes paid. Like, it was just sitting there. We tried to spin up some different products because I told the team, this is kind of your money. Like, what do you want to do with it? But then it got to this point where it was obvious, this isn't going to work.
Right.
Right. And everybody, the other thing I'll just say, if you run a shop and you worry about your team that you've assembled needing you, to a degree they do, but you're the only one that can't leave. When you're in that lifeboat and you're looking around at everybody and you're trying to ration out this, look down, you're the only one chained to the lifeboat. Look up and there are party boats circling, trying to get your people on them.
Right.
So you
That's a great
always have to
analogy.
learn. So once we got through that, it was 100% bureau for me. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. So we talked a little bit about like the motivation to leave and your own sort of personal, you were kind of going through a bit of a personal transition. The company was going through a personal transition. The bureau was up and coming. I remember
Figuring
Kareem and
itself
James, I think, went to Portland in 2013 or 2014, somewhere around there. When you took over the bureau in 2016, solely, although I know Lori's your co-pilot for sure. Shout out to Lori, which we'll do several times probably today. Like, what did you see? So you had been with the bureau for a couple of years, kind of working with the Gregs, and so you had some experience and understand the events, understand the community, and all that stuff. What were your primary goals when it was just kind of like, okay, I'm in charge now.
Yeah.
What do I see going on here over the last couple of years, and like, what do I want to sort of organizationally change?
I can cuss, right?
What's that?
I can cuss.
Yo, yeah, for sure.
My primary goal was I don't want to fuck this up.
Right.
That was my primary goal. What's interesting was, like, we had the agreement, the contract, me coming in as a partner in 2014, but it took 2 years to kind of figure out. Greg Story, who was one of the founders, had left, and it was me and Greg Hoy sitting at Taps, this little midtown Atlanta bar, talking about it. And I told him, I'm going to have to leave the bureau and reboot Engine because we have a cancer scare. My wife, we found a tumor, right? And he said, well, I can't afford to stay here. I've got to reboot Happy Cog and try to see if I can get it to a good point where I'll be able to sell it. And so we sat there and kind of played ping pong, pity ping pong back and forth. Right? And eventually I said, I really don't want to run a shop. I'll buy the bureau.
Okay.
And so that was the beginning of it. Then it became and this was at Owner Summit in Atlanta in 2016.
Okay.
Right? So then it became this trying to learn how to drive my dad's car. Like, I didn't know what everything did. I didn't understand it, but I knew I didn't want to be an event company.
Right.
I wanted to be a community. And that was the biggest thing for me was, you know how they always say, like, music is the space between the notes.
Right.
I felt like community was the space between the in-person events. And so that was really the shift. And it was a hot mess for a long time. And now it's like a beautiful mess, I think.
Organized chaos.
Yeah, but it is organized chaos, right?
When did the Slack channel, was that always there? When did the bureau start?
The Slack channels started, I want to say in 2014.
Okay, so they were there.
Yeah, it was Basecamp for a long time.
Right.
And then the Slack channel came in, but it was only a different Slack channel for every event. So if you were a serial attendee like I had been, or like Rob Har became, you were suddenly in 14 Slack channels and you didn't know who was in which one, and you cross-posted like crazy, and I would log in the morning, it's a Christmas tree of lights, and you're just like, what's happening? So then in 2016, I think it was maybe a few months after I'd come in, I launched one Slack to rule them all.
Right.
And I would say it works.
Oh, it does.
It's the biggest challenge now, and I didn't know it then, but was going to be scaling intimacy. And how do I make sure everybody feels like they're a part of something as it gets so much bigger than what it was when they knew it? So back to your original question, what were my goals? Not to screw it up, and to make sure that people started feeling supported every day, not just once every year or twice a year. That was the only times they could get out.
That makes sense. So you've been doing this now 7 years, since 16 when the contract finally went through. Obviously in that time, the world has changed several times over.
A little bit.
Agencies have, I always talk about this thing where like in the 2000s, there was this like mass exodus coming out of the internet bubble at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s. And then the mid 2000s, a lot of people who were in tech who may have gotten laid off after the bubble went into business for themselves, started their own shops, so on and so forth. And there's been like evolution and sophistication and maturity of these companies. Because if you look around the room here,
So much.
you ask people like, how long have you been in business? And my guess is if you took the aggregate average, it's probably somewhere between like 10 and 15 years, maybe even a little bit
Probably,
longer
yeah,
at
yeah.
this point. So you are kind of going back to like the late 2000s, right?
Yep.
So in the last 7 years since you've been here, what kind of like how have you observed the digital agency landscape in terms of how it's changed?
Yeah.
And how has the Bureau of Digital adapted to those changes as the digital agencies do become more sophisticated, more mature, and continue to iterate and evolve?
And more specialized.
Yeah.
I would say the biggest change, so I started my shop in 2003. And back then we were web shops. The idea of using the word agency was vile.
Right.
Because most of us left advertising
Madison
agencies.
Avenue, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I left a mom and pop shop that I loved, but they cared more about the relationship than the work. So clients could say to do the wrong thing and they would. And that was always a challenge for me and other people I knew that started. I was not a crafts person, I was an account service person. So,
Right.
but I knew crafts people and I sat next to them. So I got everybody to come on. But once we got to 2012, you started seeing people come out of school opening web shops, opening digital agencies. It started becoming digital agencies. I say it now. But I think the transition went from craftsperson to business person. And I would say some of the crafts people are kind of a hybrid, but those post 2012, and there are a lot of these shops in the community and they're great people, but they came at it as a business, whereas a lot of us were accidentally in business, they were on purpose in business. That's when we start talking about utilization rates. That's when we start talking about different concepts of financial literacy that we never talked about.
A transition from art to science.
Yeah,
a little
exactly.
bit, right?
Yeah, and so I think that's probably the biggest shift I've seen. But what I love is each group brought something with them. So the crafts people really brought that love of culture and the love of their teams. And the business-oriented owners came in and really installed and instilled that concept of this is a business.
Right.
It's not summer camp.
Right. Right. That makes a lot of sense. And then how is the Bureau sort of adjusted in terms of providing its optimal value to its members as you've seen maybe more of a shift toward the science and less towards the art?
Yeah, I would say it really, post-pandemic, which is the world we're in right now,
100%.
fingers crossed.
Right.
Everybody wanted to learn more. And we realized we have this opportunity online to share and learn all the time. So I would say what we did was we just started sharing everything we could and making space for others to share, not just in a Slack channel, but like now with open mic or with somebody saying, I want to put on this event.
Right.
We have so many member-led events now, and that means they're carving out their part of the Bureau. The Bureau is a lot of different communities under one umbrella.
Right.
And so for me, when I see them do that, that's how it starts to accommodate it. I think what I did was I took my hands off the wheel and just trusted that everyone was going to mostly drive straight and find their place that they want to be with their people. But at the same time, be able to share across the different groups. I'll also say that sometimes we go too far on something.
Yeah, but you don't know where the line is.
You don't know where the line is until you cross it, exactly. And so they're also, because if you look at the Bureau, you could say we're a business organization, but I think we're more of a people organization. And there are folks who will get upset that we're talking about health and wellness, or that we're making a comment about a political issue. And I've had conversations with different groups that felt like they were marginalized or left out. And what I've realized is I can't be a part of a community that I don't want to be in, and I can't guide a community that I don't want to be in. But I also can't be so limited in my view that I'm alienating other folks who are good people, right? Not Nazis, not saying Nazis are good people.
100%.
I don't want the good people line. But they're just feeling like they're getting pushed out to the side. I had a great conversation with somebody recently, and I don't know if I should share it or not because they might not want me to. But
anonymize it.
But it's a well-known person in the community, and he just pushed on me and said, "This place doesn't feel comfortable for conservatives."
That was Bart, by the way.
Yeah. No, and I basically said, The industry doesn't feel comfortable for conservatives.
Right.
You know, it's like if you were to ask people who worked on a certain political campaign or this or that, you're not going to hear it, or who's working with a certain gun company or this or that, right? But there's still value in their perspectives. There's still value in having them as part of the community. It's a challenge.
It's the Michael Jordan line of Republicans buy sneakers too, right?
Yeah,
So like, how do you actually make it inclusive?
I would say it's not that as much, because honestly, since membership has grown so much, I don't really worry on the sales side of it. Like before we became a membership organization, and we're about 1,200 members now, which is just ridiculous. I always felt like I was hawking tickets to an event. You know, like come see the frog-faced boy, and I'm like selling it for $10, and hey, you know, you can just come in. We need to fill the seats.
Right.
And now I'm not on that treadmill, and so I really am looking and thinking, okay, well, this individual feels this way, and it's not a bad feeling. The example that I had a conversation with some of the people in the community that were feeling marginalized, and they made a comment that a broad generalization was made about people who are Christian, right? I was raised Christian. I'm mostly agnostic. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Sure.
I'm not agnostic, and I gave up since. But they said that this broad generalization made everybody uncomfortable that was Christian, because it was basically saying you can't have Christians manage other people who aren't Christians because they're going to enforce their will.
Right.
Certain humans will do that, but can you put that human under a category?
Right.
And when they said that to me, I was like, no. You know, and I appreciated that they told me.
And
so
you and I had that conversation about a post. You were super gracious with letting me vent some concerns I had about a post that we had seen about sort of labeling all white men as kind of being whatever. And to your point, I think that is a really, it's dangerous, right? Because, and I was so happy you went here, because I was going to ask about how do you balance the needs and interests of a diverse group of 1,200 members, right? And what strategies have you found to be the most effective in fostering a sense of like inclusivity and engagement? But you can't create a separate channel for everybody who has a separate agenda. You have 1,200 channels.
And you shouldn't, right? Because if you are, then you're just creating echo chambers.
Right.
And you're getting into groupthink, and everybody's just going on there, and it's not, right? I think for me, what I realized was I have to trust people until there's a reason not to. There are a lot of times where a post is going to go in Slack, and I look at it and I go, oh, I should respond to this.
Right.
And then I just back off and I wait a few hours to see if the community responds to it. Because the reality, and I never studied community until starting about 18 months ago. I started reading books on community. I said, I should probably understand this a little better. But one of the things that you find is a self-forming, organizing, and protecting community is a community that's going to live. It's going to keep going. We don't need to accuse somebody of being a bad actor when they may have just had an opinion that's not popular.
Correct.
And that unpopular opinion is going to get other people to jump in and talk and question their own beliefs about things. And that to me is a healthy community. Not a community that says, yeah, you can't say that here, you got to go.
And that's about creating sort of that ethos and culture within the community membership of, hey, look, this is an open space and people are going to express how they express it. It's not personal. No. Like they're expressing an opinion. Hopefully it's based on business, as sometimes it does cross into sort of personal areas or whatever. But
and sometimes it's a misunderstanding. Like we're here at Owner Summit, and Derek Walker made a comment about the room, like being excited about replacing employees with AI. But I went over to talk with him after, and he said, that's not what I said. And I said, that's what I heard. And that's why I responded, I know this room pretty well.
Yeah.
Right? And he said, I was listening at the bar, and people said, in the next year or so, they are going to replace certain roles, junior roles, with AI.
Yes.
And I said, okay, but they're not excited about it, are they? And he was like, no, they're just saying it's an inevitability. I said, okay, well, so that's a miscommunication. But I didn't cut him off.
Right.
I let him finish his thought, because he's bringing a viable opportunity for others to challenge themselves and come in.
Yeah.
But I also have to stand up and say, this is my family, right? And he's part of that family now.
Right.
So there are going to be disagreements.
Sure. It's Thanksgiving dinner every day.
Just make it respectful.
Right.
And make sure at the end of it, we can coexist.
Right. Civility is important, for sure. So this show is for digital agency owners, and is really rooted in a lot of like operations and financials, helping people really utilize those two areas of their business, which they may not have a lot of experience with, and helping them run a better business, right? I'm curious, as the head of the bureau, what sort of like operational and financial challenges do you foresee coming in the next few years for the bureau, and what sort of strategies are you looking at to prepare for those, if you see any at all? Because I know you said membership is exploding, which is great.
No, and it's like 2.5% to 3% month over month growth.
Okay.
So, and this was the type of owner I was too. I just assumed things were going to work out. And I know that sounds like really ridiculous to the people post 2012, but all of us pre 2012, we're just like, we're going to do great work. We're going to share the great work. We're going to get great work. And we're going to have more money at the end of the month than we did at the beginning. And that's success. I don't need to look, I don't know. EBITDA sounds like you had a stroke. I don't understand what's happening with you.
You're what Peter Thiel would call an indefinite optimist.
Right, exactly. And it's annoying. And I'm reading the Bureau Book Club. The book this month is called Multipliers. And in a way, I'm a diminisher, because by always being optimistic, I lower the intelligence of some of the people I work with, because they get frustrated that I'm never going to see any real challenges, and they quit looking for them. So interesting book. But I would say the challenges I think everybody's going to be facing is really about pricing services as AI becomes involved, and understanding the market's going to keep in this turmoil, and we're going to have new services that we offer. I think the idea of specializing and segmenting services out, this was in a recent newsletter, I think that's a thing. And I was sitting next to JP, and he was showing me some of his plans for offering service lines, right?
Yep.
So you don't have to hire us, you can sign up for the service line. And I think that's another thing. We're just going to have to rethink how we sell what we sell and what the value of that is.
Right.
And that's going to be really hard for a lot of folks who don't want to let go of the way it is now.
100%. I was just having this conversation with Mark in the hallway, right? And we were talking about like, the room in there is very, I'm going to use the word sentimental. They're sentimental about their companies. They're sentimental about their people, right? You know who is not sentimental about your company or your people? The clients.
Truth.
At the end of the day, the clients are always going to want their service providers to give them something better, faster, and cheaper. And that is what technology always winds up doing. It does wind up providing deliverables better, faster, cheaper. So I think there is that sort of that balancing act between you as the owner of your company, who has to serve your, servant leadership, right? We talk about that a lot. So serving your team, your culture, your business, but also balancing that with the needs of the reality of the world, which is your clients are going to continue to want more and more from you for less and less.
Yep.
That will always be the case. It has always been the case. That is never going to go away. So how are you sort of leveraging human beings and technology in order to provide that? And again, this is not something new that businesses had to go through.
It's just another cycle of the same story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think one of the things too with AI, and I don't want to make this about AI because we're going to do the whole thing.
That's good.
I think the other thing is too, like we were just having this conversation the other day, right? We were talking about we were talking about this before we came on the air. Senior people, right? And then junior people.
Yep.
And then will machines actually wind up creating the next technological advance, whereas in the history so far of mankind, personkind, whatever, humankind, it has been human beings who have invented the next thing.
Yeah.
Right? Will machines start to invent the next thing?
Based on what humans have invented before.
Right, because we were talking today about generative AI, and I agree today it's the tip of the iceberg, but where you start getting towards what they call general intelligence. And that is really where you kind of jump the shark into, you actually don't need human input for general intelligence. If it has general intelligence, then it can produce all that itself. And that's really where, so like, do people go away? Are things like politically, like universal basic income, does that become a bigger and bigger deal as more people, live longer? Like I just saw a guy interviewed, he's a famous investor, and he's spending a lot of time with scientists at Stanford and Caltech, and what he's studying is longevity and aging.
Okay.
And he is basically saying that they're telling him if you're alive in 2030, you will live to 100, probably 120. And not only that, but you will look better and feel better at 95 than you did at 55 because of bioinformationals, biometrics, nanotech, CRISPR, like all this 3D printing, all of it, right? Yeah. Skin will be replaced, organs will be replaced, everything will be replaced. Well, if you're going to work till 120 instead of, or maybe you're not going to work, you're going to live that long, but you're still retiring at 65. What are you doing for 60 years, right? And I think that is where the rubber is really going to meet the road on what it is. Hopefully, we're all dead by that point.
So, mad respect for Jump the Shark and the Happy Days reference. I had that
you like that mind.
One? And what we're describing feels like a Gene Roddenberry, like Star Trek episode, right? But if you think about it, science fiction becomes science fact.
100%.
And I do, this idea of a minimum income, this idea of all this type of stuff. Yeah,
maybe
that could be a thing.
Yeah,
right. The 3D printed organs could be a thing. Like that could all end up happening.
Yeah.
It will be one of those things that we feel about, like our parents felt about ATMs. Right? It'll be like, oh, I can't know.
I felt about that about ATMs. I went to the teller. I was like, I don't know about these machines and checks.
I know, but yeah, I think as we look at what AI is going to do, I know we're still hitting on that a little bit. I really do think it's going to create more jobs, better jobs, and this was a part of the conversation last night. Like those illustrations, Gabe basically did a prompt, and Dolly gave Gabe these illustrations, and now a lawyer has got illustrations on a slide. It allows him to communicate better what he wanted to get across.
100%.
So clients can use it to communicate better what they want to get across, and then a designer can see it and have a prompt, a place to start. Now, some people will say this boxes them into a corner, but that's where they have to be able to defend another direction. Mm-hmm. And if you go away from AI and go human, you're probably going to be better off because everybody's going to be going AI.
Right.
So to stand out, you have to be made by humans, for humans, right? And so all of it seems, to your point, like it's just another cycle in the wheel. And at the end of it, I really think humans will still be standing there. We just may have robot dogs.
Right.
You know?
I saw Mark like that. I saw 60% or 2/3 of the jobs that exist today did not exist in 1950. And that will continue to go, right? I'm sure in another 50 years, 2/3 of the jobs that exist today will also not exist in 2073, right?
Yeah.
Which, we look as though that's such a long way away. Not really, if we're all living to 150, right? So yeah. Carl, this was awesome. Thank you so much.
So glad.
We're gonna do a live switch in and switch out. Here he comes. So I gotta take this off. This is real time, guys. Of course I don't know.
We can do it. I can do this live.
I'm out of here.
We can do this live. You can sit there.
Thank you.
We're keeping all this in because it's funny. It's great. Carl, thanks for having me. Thanks for blasting my face up there for perfect attendance.
Dude, you know what? If we had an award, and I was so bummed when I realized that we did not have time, because I would have handed you a plaque. I would have.
Hey man, I've been here to every single one of them. All right, so last question of the episode, which is our favorite. What are you currently obsessed with? It could be anything.
I am currently obsessed with Slack. I mean, I am so knee-deep in looking through the input from the community about where we need to take it, how we need to do it, and also how I can use AI without making people feel like their privacy is violated, giving them the content they want, and how I can take, I said Slack, but what I should say is the conversations within it. And how that content can now be used to educate everybody, even across a channel they might not be in.
Yeah.
So I think that is my real obsession right now, is how can I elevate conversations so they can educate everybody?
Yeah, because that
sounded good.
That did sound good.
Good.
Yeah, it's good. That's the most important, I think, part of that whole community is that it's a conversation, having a whole bunch of people that want the same thing kind of be there. Carl, thank you for being on our podcast. It's a small one.
I would hug you, but we'd probably have feedback.
Oh, we can hug. Don't worry. It happens.
And I'll hug you.
I like this is on delay, so I get to see it.
And I'll hug you later. Although I started to say something else, and it came out fug, so that's gonna sound really weird.
We're gonna keep this because it's fun. Thank you for another episode, and thank you for having us. And for the last one, thanks, Carl.
You got it.